Hello, my friends. In today's episode, I'm talking with Mark Fisher, and we're doing a deep dive on mindset. We're talking about some philosophical principles around mindset and some real practical things you can do to cultivate a growth mindset to help you be the best entrepreneur you can be. So if that sounds like fun for you, keep on listening. Let's get started. Hello, fitness business nerds. What's up? Welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. Today, I'm here with Mark Fisher. How are you, Mr. Fisher?
I'm doing great. How are you?
So fantastic to have you on the podcast today. What a delight. And especially a delight because I want to take a moment before we even dive in to talk about your recent book. We did a whole podcast about it, but I want to just remind people they can still fucking get it. So go get the book at businessforunicorns.com/book, but tell them what can they find in it? Who's it for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for training gym owners. It's for people like you that own gyms, written by somebody that also owns a gym that knows all the fun and challenging things that go along with that. It is a compilation of a lot of the blog posts I've written over the past several years, and I'm really excited. We're getting really awesome feedback on it. It's not a big financial commitment. So if you're somebody who just wants a little bit more business for unicorns in your life, it's a very affordable way to do it. And if you're like me and a book lover, maybe that'll be the proper format for you to consume our musings.
Yeah, 100%. We've gotten some great feedback. People found that it's both inspiring and insightful in terms of how you run a market for Fisher Fitness, and it has like a ton of practical takeaways. So friends, go get the book and have a book club with your fellow gym owners because it'll be a great conversation starter. Well, let's dive in. Today's topic, this was actually one that was requested by someone, and it was actually Brad. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce your last name right, Brad, but it's Bodnerchuk. Do you know Brad?
I do know Brad, yeah.
Yeah, Brad Bondarchuk. Thanks for the request, Brad. Brad wanted us to talk a little bit about mindset, like the importance of having a really clear mindset for owning a gym long term. Like, how do you play the long game and have a mindset that really sets you up for success? So, let's just start with like, what the heck does mindset mean? So, you want to kick us off, Fisher?
Well, actually, you're the academic. I want
Sure.
to hear your definition of mindset.
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts about it. Yeah. I mean, the person who popularized this term is Carol Dweck in her book, Mindset. But this is a term that's been around for a long time. And I think the shortest definition that I would give of mindset, it's really a way of it's kind of a self-talk strategy, right? It's a way of thinking about the attitude of the voice in your head, right? Of thinking a little bit about how do you manage the conversation that's happening in your head? How do you manage your opinions and beliefs and attitudes about the world around you? And there's lots of different versions of mindset. The version of mindset that Carol Dweck talks about is specifically having a growth mindset, which essentially having self-talk about yourself that you are capable of growth, you are capable of change, you are capable of learning, that you are not a fixed person, that the world around you is not fixed, that is also changing and growing and evolving. And and I think maybe that's a good place to start. Is, in my opinion, I think having what Carol describes as a growth mindset is a really important one as an entrepreneur, because things are constantly changing. And if we don't think that we are capable of changing and growing and evolving with our business, then that's a real challenge. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs that we've worked with over the years at times will admit, and this has probably been true for us too at times, that our business has been challenged when we have been fixed in our way of thinking about our business. That having a fixed mindset can be a real cock blocker to getting our dreams. And so I think, having a growth mindset and believing in the human's capacity to grow and change, I think is kind of critical starting point. Yeah. What would you add to that?
I don't know. Actually, I have a ton to add to that. I think I agree. It's maybe the foundational piece is what sort of identity you have cultivated, because the possibility does or does not allow for you to grow and evolve over time. I think a related thought that is maybe not explicitly mindset, unless you have something else you wanted to add on that point before
I was going to ask you, because one of the things that you're really good about is finding things that help you cultivate the kind of mindset you want. Do you have a lot of regular practices in your life that help you stay in a mindset that's the most beneficial to the life you want to live? And so, I mean, maybe you want to kind of illuminate, what are the things that you do that help you stay in a growth mindset?
Yeah, I think there are probably two particular practices that I have found to be valuable. I mean, the first is really having rituals of exposing myself to inputs that reinforce that message over and over and over. So this is everything from, I think, forward-thinking business books to uplifting personal development stuff, some of which can be quite corny. And I have a particularly embarrassing predilection for 1970s personal development, which is always like just a splash of problematic, but also like kind of uplifting in its way.
Sure.
And I think that one thing that seems to be very true, this is something I'm thinking a lot about, and I promise I won't take us completely down this philosophical rabbit hole, but this ongoing question, does free will exist? Right? Is free will actually like a thing? Or in fact, are we really this combination of variables that on the one hand are genetic, which are then interacting with the nurture, which is in itself just a bunch of other mathematical variables? And part of what I've been thinking a lot about this recently is one of my favorite scientific thinkers is a man named Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who wrote a very famous book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. He had another book called Behaved, and he is writing a new book called Determined. And his premise is that free will does not exist. And this is very kind of, for someone like him writing that book, you're like, oh no, you too, Sapolsky.
Crap.
But
I have to really take this seriously now.
The thing that I think is inspiring about it is, you know, the two theses of this book, which he's working on, so I heard him talk about this in a podcast, it's not out yet, is on the one hand, free will doesn't exist. And that's kind of okay, because if you look at the history of the human race, we were always attributing things like witchcraft and the gods. And just because we lost the ability to attribute magical things to the causes of things doesn't mean that life has really lost its magic, because the other piece of this, which is I think the more uplifting part of this, is what is also true is that change is possible. And the takeaway here specifically is that people, I think, to have a tendency to completely underestimate the structural, systemic, environmental forces that are constantly shaping their identity, what they think is possible for them. So the thing that, you know, whether you're able to do or not, I guess will depend on your set of mathematical variables. But the thing that it is valuable to develop rituals around, I think, is real rigor around the environments. And the thing that I tend to encourage people to think through is three kinds of environments. The first is intentional, attentional, not intentional, attentional, which is to say, what are the media you're consuming? What are the books that you're reading? And again, I'm not the guy that says, don't ever look at the news per se, like, you know, be a citizen, but also realize that can be like picking a scab, right? For some people. And I say that as somebody that can occasionally pick the scab and not go down good rabbit holes that way. But I think being thoughtful about the books you're reading, the information you're consuming is one piece. I think our social environments, right? And this is, I think, a 1970s statement that is still true in principle, a little outdated now, which is that like you only change by dint of the people you meet and the books that you read. I think now our media is probably a lot more consuming than just books, but I think that's true, right? So the people you spend your time with, what sort of conversations are they having? What sort of stories are they telling? What narratives are they living into? And is that moving you in the direction of who you want to be and how you want to show up and the life you want to live and how you want to impact the world? And then thirdly, I think not to be underestimated is your physical environment. That's why I'm such a fan of things like getting out of your gym and going either on vacation, like I just recently did myself, or going to things like the Unicorn Society retreat, which we're having in Las Vegas, getting around like-minded people and getting out of the patterns of your day-to-day, which I think they won't necessarily create rigidity, but I think they're not as fertile ground for creativity. It's no secret. Many people that are creatives, and entrepreneurs are your kind of creative artists, often speak of getting their best ideas when they're not in their day-to-day. And based on your resources, based on your setup, you may or may not be able to do that a lot, but I think that is an important part of what you're doing. And, you know, at the risk of now getting a little bit out over my skis here, I think there's even something to be said for the physical spaces that you work in. Now, admittedly, I think at times perhaps to a fault, although my wife is incredibly supportive of this freakish obsession I have with the physical space that I'm in. If it's not organized, if it's not appealing, if it's not inspiring, it's very hard for me to do work, right? That's part of why when I do my goal setting, something that's very important to me is finding a space that's uplifting. I will often go to, like, while I'm on vacation, I will go to the ritziest hotel lobby, or I will go like sit in front of the ocean as the sun is rising, or somewhere that really makes me inhale and feel like excited about the possibility for my future. So I think I would offer those are, and I think there's a number of different action steps one could take from that, but really thinking through in a methodical way how you are managing or not, how you are ideally managing in an intentional way, each of those three kinds of environments, I think can go a long way to give you the inputs to have your mindset be able to handle the slings and arrows of entrepreneurship, which is going to have ups and downs. It's going to have ups and downs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really well said. And then I know we want to try and keep this podcast a shorter one today, but I feel like we could make this one like a 3-hour conversation.
Yeah,
but totally. I think to be short, I think, I want to say, I think free will probably doesn't exist. And it's really useful to act as if it does.
Yes.
Right? Like it's really useful to create behaviors and disciplines and patterns in your life as if you have ultimate control over what happens next and the next word that comes out of your mouth, even though I couldn't predict it for myself. So I think all that is useful. And I think other people have also, I think I quoted this on this podcast before, but Kurt Lewin is, one of the fathers of organizational psychology, and he has this formula about human behavior that really is behavior as a function of the person and their perception of their environment. And the idea is purely like the perception of their environment is such a key piece to how everyone behaves. And the mindset is a big part of that, right? It's such a function of the people, the information, the physical objects around you change completely how you act. And there's so much research to support that you doing your goal setting in those inspiring places actually fucking matters. It's not just witchcraft. It actually makes a big difference to how you see yourself, and the story you tell yourself about your life and what's possible absolutely changes if you're sitting on a crowded, noisy bus or staring at the ocean. Right? Those are different vibes that really impact the outcomes you're capable of in any given moment. Yeah, so I think 100% that all tracks. I guess, for people who are not yet in the habit of being thoughtful about the things you mentioned, the content they consume, the people they're surrounded with, their physical environment, where do they start? Where's a listener who's like, yeah, I want to get better at really, being thoughtful about the kind of internal dialogue I'm cultivating for myself? Where do you begin?
Yeah, I mean, I'm completely riffing here, but some things that come to mind are, first, when you're thinking about your intentional environment, that is, I would define largely your apps and your TV and what books you are, or in some cases are not reading. And I think similar to a nutritional diet, rather than stripping things away, I think it is usually best to focus on being additive. So rather than saying, even though you could block, maybe a news app that that is not valuable for your overall emotional well-being, it might be better to start with what can I add in? What sort of podcasts like this one? What books can I read? What can I add into my information diet that I know is going to cultivate the type of identity, the type of mindset that I need to be more impactful, to feel more of a sense of possibility? I think secondly, when we're talking about the social environment, there is something to be said. And this one I always struggle with a little bit here too, right? Because sometimes you hear this phrase, which feels true, right? You're the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And then, correctly, everyone's like, but do I throw away this? There's a person, my best friend from college, and they're a complete waste of life, but I love them and they're a fucking mess. So I'm not suggesting necessarily that you throw people out of your life. Similarly, I would encourage you to think through, who are the people in your life that fill you up, that help you be a bigger, stronger, more powerful version of yourself, and how do you intentionally create more time with them, right? And that's largely a function of like, how are you spending the time in your schedule? What are the minutes, the hours that you're spending with people that are inspiring you to be a bigger and better version of yourself? And then the final piece, of course, is the physical environment. And that one is take a vacation, find a learning event, find something that you can do. Again, depending on your resources, it might just be an afternoon by yourself on a weekend where you go for a drive to get coffee somewhere new and have some real you time and maybe read some of the informational material we talked about that's going to inspire you. Or at best, schedule some kind of education. It's something we've talked about on this podcast before. It's no secret, no disrespect to the content in many coaching groups, the Unicorn Society being one of them. Part of the secret sauce, I think, is always just getting out of your business and having that physical space to look at your business from a distance and a perspective, and allow that to create both new clarity and new possibilities.
Yeah. Well said, my friend. I think those are all great first steps on all three of those kind of categories. I maybe, for the interest of time, will just kind of add one more thought, which was kind of inherent in your last one there, which is, I think many of our listeners and a lot of people that we've worked with in Unicorn Society would benefit from having all three of those additive measures be not about work. Right. So adding some information to your diet that's just about something you're curious about, that's not about running a gym, right? That's something that just brings you enjoyment or makes you laugh, right? To have the focus be on something that is not about you being, quote, productive all the time. I think is something I see a lot of entrepreneurs, including yours truly, and I'm sure you would agree, we just don't do enough of all the time. Same thing with the people in our lives, right? I have a group of friends I just went on a trip with 2 weekends ago who we have nothing in common work-wise. And we go on these trips, we don't talk about work at all, but they fill me up in other ways, right? Yeah. And so surrounding yourself with people who do that can be valuable. So anyway, I just, having a focus, not just be on adding more work context in my life, but having a work context outside of work. So when you come back to the work, you feel refreshed, you feel rejuvenated, you feel like, we have fresh eyes, fresh ears, because that's the thing that I find over time just gets harder and harder to do as in our old age, in our middle age, my ears and eyes are just not as fresh anymore. Right. And so we need those moments away as your vacation just proved. Yeah.
So true. It's just so important. And it's at least speaking for myself, I think both time away and social time are completely counterintuitive. I mean, it's the two shining examples in my life of where if I follow what feels correct and intuitive me, I go down the wrong rabbit hole, because what is intuitive to me is to always try to get one more thing done, or to be a hermit and be like, all right, this weekend, I just want to be alone. Just want to I don't know, stare at the TV, just be by myself. Right. And both, I think, nourishing social time and time away from the business, which of course are often, similar, both will happen at the same time, even though it's not intuitive, are so important to me functioning well at the business. And I think part of this question is, how do you do this over the long haul? And I think like that's a big piece of it, is giving yourself breaks, because you can't sprint a marathon. And this is a marathon if you're going to do it for a long time. And I know that can be a challenge depending on what's going on in your business, which is why, admittedly, you got to usually sprint to a certain level of success that you can get the resources to breathe a little bit. Because if you're 5 years in and you're working all the time, for the love of God, let's get on a call, come to a retreat, let us help you. Because I want to say I have space for those of you listening that maybe feel like I just absolutely can't do it. I'm not there. And again, if you're not there yet, I understand there might be time and place for that. But long-term, I think your point is very well taken, Keeler. Like, I don't think you can actually, even if you only are Machiavellian, you only care about being successful, that will not happen without real mental, emotional time away from the business.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, let's leave it there, my friend. I think we did a good job of being deeply philosophical and also very practical. So there's some good, hopefully some good
listeners.
Takeaways. Yeah, and Brad, who suggested this, thanks for the suggestion. For those of you who have other things you want us to talk about, email us, michael@businessofunicorns.com, mark@businessofunicorns.com. Go grab Mark's book at businessofunicorns.com/book, and leave us a 5-star review everywhere you listen to this podcast, because we're the best. On the next one.